What if a single father, exhausted and out of options, boarded a flight with his sick daughter, only to be unexpectedly called to the front of the plane by a mysterious woman in first class? What happened next would change not just his journey, but the course of his entire life. Before we dive into this emotional and unforgettable story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of warmth, hope, and life-changing encounters. Now, let's begin. Single Dad took the last seat on a plane. But the woman in first class said, "Bring him here." The terminal was a storm of rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, and parents trying to corral wandering children. Jake Bennett clutched his 2-year-old daughter tighter, her warm head resting against his shoulder, her breath fast and shallow from the lingering cold that wouldn't let go. Her tiny backpack dangled from his wrist. His own duffel was slung over his back, half-zipped the worn canvas held together by duct tape and stubbornness. Last call for Flight 237 to Chicago Gate C-12. Final boarding. He cursed under his breath and picked up the pace, weaving through the crowd as Lily whimpered softly against him. She hadn't stopped coughing since sunrise. This wasn't just a trip anymore. It was a race against time. The pediatric specialist in Chicago, Dr. Martin, was retiring in 3 days. Jake had spent every last favor dollar and ounce of pride he had calling in contacts, filing old insurance appeals, and begging the scheduler for one final appointment. And he got it, just one. One last chance for Lily to be seen by someone who still believed in treating a child like a person, not a case file. But only if they made it to Chicago. He reached the gate just as the last agent was about to pull the rope across the entrance. "Wait," Jake shouted. "Please, I need to be on that flight." The gate agent, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes but a tired posture, hesitated. "Sir, the flight's full. Standby's already closed." Jake shook his head. "There's got to be something, anything. My daughter's sick. We have to get to Chicago today. Please." She tapped something on her terminal, frowning. "I'm sorry. Unless someone cancels in the next minute, we're out of options." As if on cue, her earpiece crackled. She turned, slightly listened, and then typed quickly. A beat. Her eyes met Jake's. "You're in luck. Someone just missed their connection. One seat just opened, but it's in the very back. 31F, non-reclining right by the restroom." Jake didn't care if it was a crate in the cargo hold. "I'll take it." She handed him the boarding pass. "Good luck, sir." He thanked her, adjusted Lily against his chest, and jogged down the jet bridge. The door was already half closed behind the final passengers. A flight attendant took one look at him, sweat-soaked shirt toddler in arms, pure desperation in his eyes, and simply nodded him on. He found the seat. It was worse than he imagined. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something more pungent beneath. The seat was wedged against a bulkhead wall and a line for the lavatory. But it didn't matter. He eased into it, trying not to jostle Lily. Her cough had turned wet and rattling. She stirred in his arms, started fussing, then began crying outright. Jake bounced her gently. "Shh. It's okay, sweetheart. We're almost there." Across the aisle, a man in a business suit frowned and put in his earbuds. A row up, a woman gave him a look that blended pity with annoyance. Jake kept his head down. He'd learned how to be invisible. Being a single dad in public often meant surviving the quiet judgment of strangers who had no idea what it took to get a child this far in life. Alive, loved, and still smiling, even if a little sick. Lily's cries grew louder. Jake tried everything, her favorite lullaby hummed under his breath, the soft tapping rhythm on her back, the gentle rock side to side. Nothing worked. The flight attendant approached. "Sir, would you like some water or a blanket?" He nodded gratefully. "A blanket, please." She returned with one and whispered, "You're doing great. She's just tired." Jake nearly broke, then just that one sentence of kindness undid him more than any glare or sigh ever could. He wrapped Lily tighter and leaned his head back, eyes closed. For the first time in hours, the weight of the day began to settle. He hadn't slept since the night before. He couldn't afford to. Between finishing his shift at the auto shop, fixing a last-minute furnace emergency for a neighbor to cover gas money, and packing for a 2-day trip on $0, there hadn't been time for rest. The hum of the engines deepened. They were taxiing. Jake opened his eyes to a blur of light and shadow and noticed a flight attendant hurrying toward him, eyes locked on a message in her earpiece. She stopped at his row. Mr. Bennett. He sat straighter, suddenly defensive. Yes, you and your daughter. Would you mind moving to the front of the plane? A passenger in first class has requested your relocation. Jake blinked. I think you've got the wrong guy. No, sir. Passenger in seat 1A specifically asked for you and your daughter. She's insistent. Jake hesitated. Look, I didn't mean to bother anyone. We'll keep it down. No, sir, it's not a complaint. She asked kindly. Please follow me. Jake clutched Lily tighter and stood unsure if this was real or some odd misunderstanding. Passengers around him craned their necks to watch as he followed the attendant up the aisle. Every step felt like walking through a dream or a trap, he couldn't tell which. Then he saw her. Seat 1A. A woman in her mid-30s dressed in understated elegance. Wavy chestnut hair tucked behind one ear. Clear green eyes that seemed to see everything but reveal nothing. She didn't look surprised when he appeared. Just calm. Certain. She gestured to the seat beside her. He can sit here. The attendant nodded, motioning Jake into 2B. Jake hesitated. Why? The woman smiled faintly. You look tired. Let her rest. It's the least I can do. Her voice was smooth composed, yet something fragile flickered beneath it. Jake sat bewildered. Lily, as if sensing a change in altitude or perhaps warmth, nuzzled into his chest and fell asleep within seconds. The woman looked down at the little girl. For a fraction of a second, her expression shifted. A tremor of loss, of recognition. Then it vanished. Jake finally spoke. Thank you. I don't know why you... She cut him off gently. It's fine. Just rest. He looked at her again more closely this time. Something about her was hauntingly familiar. But he couldn't place it. Not yet. And neither of them knew. They were about to change each other's lives forever. The silence in first class was unlike anything Jake had felt in years. No coughing, no whirring machines, no clanging wrenches or crying toddlers, just the hum of jet engines and the low rustle of pages turning in expensive magazines. Lily slept soundly now, her fevered forehead resting against his chest, a light snore whistling from her nose. The thick seat beneath him cradled his spine like a luxury he had no business experiencing. Everything smelled of leather citrus and something calming like cedar wood. Across from him, the woman in 1A sipped mineral water from a crystal glass. Jake studied her out of the corner of his eye. She wasn't just wealthy. She moved like someone used to making decisions and being obeyed. There was nothing flashy in her appearance, no glittering jewelry, no designer logos, just clean, effortless elegance. A pale blue silk blouse, navy trousers, and a silver watch that looked more functional than decorative. She didn't look at him, but he could sense she was aware of his every movement. Her posture was still yet alert. She sat like someone trained to absorb a room before stepping into it. Jake cleared his throat. You didn't have to do this. She turned slightly, finally meeting his eyes. I know, she said simply, but I wanted to. Jake waited for a condition and explanation. None came. Are you a flight attendant, manager, or something, he asked, fumbling for context. A small smile ghosted across her lips. No, just a passenger. He didn't believe that for a second. Normal passengers didn't request strangers from the back to be upgraded mid-flight, and flight crews didn't scramble like that unless someone held real authority. She turned back toward the window, and the conversation, such as it was, seemed closed. Jake shifted uncomfortably, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's damp forehead. Her skin felt a little cooler. That was something. He looked down at her at the little hands curled into fists, the cheeks flushed from sleep, and felt the familiar blend of exhaustion and awe. She was the one thing he hadn't failed at. Not completely. He leaned his head back, suddenly aware of how heavy his limbs felt. The darkness behind his eyelids pulled at him. He must have drifted because the next thing he knew, he felt a soft weight settling over his lap. A cashmere blanket tucked carefully over Lily's legs. He opened his eyes. The woman was adjusting the blanket with careful hands, her movements quiet and efficient. As she leaned closer, Jake noticed the faint scent of lavender and something else, maybe vetiver. It reminded him of something safe, something he couldn't quite name. She caught him watching and paused. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly. She looked cold. Jake swallowed. "No, thank you. That's very kind." She nodded, straightened, and looked out the window again. There was something in her gaze, distant but not distracted, like she wasn't just looking at the clouds but at memories long buried in them. Jake couldn't help himself. "Do you have kids?" The question landed between them like a dropped tray. Her lips parted slightly, but for a few seconds no sound came out. Then she exhaled. "I did." Jake's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's okay," she said quickly, eyes still on the window. "You couldn't have known." There was a pause. Not awkward, just tender, heavy. Jake lowered his eyes. "My wife? She didn't make it through childbirth. I wasn't ready to be a father, still not most days." He didn't know why he said that. He hadn't told a soul outside his mechanic buddies in passing. But, sitting here next to this stranger, the words had found their own way out. The woman looked at him now. Really looked. Her green eyes were clearer than before, less distant. "She'd be proud of you," she said. Jake let out a tired breath, smiling bitterly. "You don't know me." "No," she said. "But I know the look of someone who hasn't slept in days and still puts someone else first." She held his gaze a moment longer, then turned her attention back to her drink. Jake blinked away a sudden sting in his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, as if debating whether to give him a real answer. Finally, Evelyn. Jake. They shook hands awkwardly since Lily was still asleep in his arms, but it was a moment of something shifting. A recognition. "I feel like I've seen you before," he added. Maybe in a magazine or something. Evelyn gave him a small amused look. "Maybe. Or maybe I just have one of those faces." Jake almost laughed, but something in her tone suggested he shouldn't press. A flight attendant approached, asked if they needed anything. Evelyn declined. Jake just asked for water. As the attendant walked away, Evelyn leaned back in her seat. Her fingers brushed against her wrist where a charm bracelet rested beneath the edge of her sleeve. A tiny gold airplane dangled from it. Jake noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he looked down at Lily again and whispered, "We're gonna make it, baby girl." Evelyn heard it. Her fingers curled tighter around her glass. The hum of the engines deepened as the plane began its slow descent toward Chicago. The golden light of late afternoon spilled through the windows, warming the cabin with a kind of quiet magic. For a few brief minutes, Jake forgot about medical bills, overdue rent, and the loneliness that had clawed at him for the last 2 years. And Evelyn forgot about sterile hospital rooms, press interviews, and the empty nursery she hadn't had the courage to clear out. In 2B and 1A, something unnamed had begun. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile spark of something neither of them believed in anymore. Hope. The flight had begun its steady cruise above the clouds, the sun casting golden ribbons over the wing outside Evelyn's window. But her thoughts weren't on the horizon. They were tethered to the small child asleep in the arms of the man beside her, and the gentle rise and fall of his chest as he too finally surrendered to exhaustion. Evelyn Hart had spent the last 5 years mastering the art of self-control on stage in boardrooms across negotiating tables where billions hung in the balance. But now, seated next to this stranger and his feverish daughter, her carefully constructed armor was beginning to crack. She hadn't expected it. It started with the sound of that child's cry, a sound she hadn't heard since the night she lost her own baby. The kind of sound that bypassed logic and protocol and reached straight into the softest, most haunted parts of her. When she first heard it echoing from the back of the plane, it had caught her off guard. She'd flinched, then stiffened, then inexplicably stood up. The flight attendant had turned startled. "Miss Hart, is everything all right?" Evelyn hadn't answered right away. She simply looked back toward the rear of the plane, her vision narrowing to the aisle. She had said the words before she could think them. "Bring him here." The attendant blinked. "Excuse me, the man holding the crying child. I want them moved up here. Seat 2B is open. We don't usually transfer passengers like that once boarding is... Tell the captain if you have to." Evelyn had said not harshly but with a finality that made further argument impossible. "I'll sign whatever's necessary. Just bring them here." Back in the present, Evelyn glanced sideways. Jake was asleep, but not peacefully. His brow was furrowed even in rest. A man who had forgotten what it meant to relax. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. His daughter shifted in his arms, murmuring something incoherent before snuggling deeper against his chest. Evelyn's throat tightened. She had bought this airline 5 years ago. Not for the prestige, not even for the money. She'd bought it because flying had always meant something to her freedom, escape the illusion of control. Up here, everything was quiet, predictable. Altitude made the world look small and manageable. But right now, nothing felt small. Nothing felt safe. Evelyn closed her eyes, and for a moment she wasn't in first class. She was back in the hospital clutching a bassinet that would never be filled. Listening to doctors whisper about fetal distress and cord accidents and how these things just happen. They'd told her it wasn't her fault, and she had believed them. Until the silence settled in. Until she came home to a nursery with untouched walls and tiny clothes that still smelled of dreams. Until her ex-husband, now stopped coming home altogether. Evelyn turned her gaze back to the man beside her. Jake hadn't stirred. His jaw, strong and slightly stubbled, was clenched in his sleep as if he were bracing for something. Battle-worn, but not bitter. There was a quiet nobility in how he held his child arms curled protectively, his own neck bent awkwardly to shield her from the cool cabin air. She reached down almost without thinking and adjusted the blanket that had slipped from Lily's feet. Her hand paused briefly above the child's tiny toes, then withdrew quickly as if she'd touched a flame. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses and a pearl brooch was watching. "You've got a kind heart," the woman said, smiling softly. Evelyn stiffened slightly. "It's not that," she murmured. The woman just nodded knowingly. "Whatever it is, I think you were meant to be on this flight." Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't believe in fate. Not anymore. And yet, this man, this child, she'd chosen them, hadn't she? On a whim, or maybe not a whim at all. Maybe some deep-buried instinct had recognized something in them, a wound she couldn't see but could feel. The echo of grief. Because you don't forget the shape of absence. You recognize it in others like a secret handshake. The pilot announced their cruising altitude. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A flight attendant offered her a warm towel, which she accepted more out of habit than need. She didn't notice the towel had gone cold in her hand until Jake stirred. His eyes blinked open, slowly unfocused, then landed on Evelyn. His arms tightened protectively around Lily instinctively before he realized where he was. "I'm sorry," he said, voice gravelly. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." "You needed it," Evelyn said gently. "Both of you." He rubbed his eyes, looked down at Lily, then at her. "Still not sure how I ended up here." She hesitated, then replied, "Maybe I just wanted to remember what it felt like to hear a child breathe in their sleep." Jake stared at her, something in his eyes softening. Understanding. Not pity, not confusion. Recognition. "I'm sorry," he said quietly and meant it. He didn't need details. That sentence said everything. She offered him a nod of gratitude. The silence between them now felt different. Not heavy, not distant, but shared. Jake sat up straighter, shifting Lily slightly. "I never got your full name." "Evelyn," she said with the faintest smile. "Evelyn Hart." Jake's brow furrowed. The name registered somewhere. He'd seen it, read it, but he let it go. "I'm Jake Bennett," he said, "and this troublemaker is Lily." Lily stirred just slightly, and for a second Evelyn saw a flicker of light in the child's sleepy eyes. It was a look of trust, innocent, undeniable. Something loosened inside her. As the cabin lights glowed dim, Amber Evelyn leaned back into her seat and Jake sat quietly beside her. Lily nestled between two people who had forgotten what it meant to believe in beginnings. But somewhere in the thin air and flickering lights of that flight something had begun to take root, slowly, tentatively like hope, on the edge of grief. And it all started with 3 words whispered at 30,000 feet. "Bring him here." By the time the flight passed its halfway mark, the sky outside had darkened into a deep velvet blue stars scattered faintly across the curve of the earth. The cabin lights were dimmed, casting soft halos over tray tables and sleeping passengers. In seat 2B, Jake sat still watching Lily's chest rise and fall beneath the pale blue blanket. Her fever had eased slightly, but a dry cough still escaped her every few minutes. Across the aisle, no one stared anymore. The novelty of the man from coach and the little girl who'd cried her way into first class had worn off. But between Jake and Evelyn, the quiet had only deepened and thickened with something unspoken. Evelyn hadn't said another word since she gave her name. Jake hadn't pressed, not out of politeness, out of instinct. It was the same instinct he'd learned when he held his wife's hand during her final labor when the monitors had slowed and no one would meet his eyes. Some silences weren't meant to be broken. They had to be respected even when they carried weight enough to crush you. Still, the silence between him and Evelyn wasn't hostile. It wasn't even cold. It was layered, fragile. Like a glass bridge they were both afraid to walk across. Jake leaned back slightly, adjusting Lily against his shoulder. She sighed in her sleep and clutched a fistful of his shirt. His neck ached. His back throbbed. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was with him, and that somehow, against all odds, she had slept soundly for nearly 2 hours beside a woman she'd never met. He glanced over. Evelyn's head was tilted toward the window again, but he noticed her hand resting in her lap clenched tightly around a delicate silver chain. At the end of it was a charm, small, golden, heart-shaped. Jake hesitated, then asked quietly, "Was that hers?" Evelyn didn't look at him. She loosened her grip on the charm, slowly. "Yes," she said. "It was part of the hospital keepsake box. They gave it to me after she was gone." Jake's voice was gentle. Your daughter Evelyn nodded once, still not turning. She never took a breath. Not one. The words were matter of fact, controlled, but Jake felt them like a punch to the chest. "I'm so sorry," he said. She finally looked at him, and for the first time since they met, Jake saw it all the years behind those green eyes, the weight she carried not in her body but in her bones. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "No one ever knows what to say anyway." Jake thought for a moment. "Maybe not. But I know what it's like to lose something and still have to keep breathing." Evelyn blinked, startled not by the sentiment but by the ease with which he said it. Jake leaned forward a little, careful not to disturb Lily. "After my wife passed, everyone tried to help. Neighbors brought food, friends called, people sent cards, but the silence was still the loudest thing in the house." Evelyn nodded. "I remember walking into the nursery after the funeral. It was like time stopped in there." Jake gave her a sad smile. "Grief doesn't keep a schedule." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. And it doesn't care how successful you are, or how well you hide it." Her voice dropped on the last word. Jake sensed that wasn't a statement, it was a confession. "Sometimes I feel like I'm two people," she continued. There's the version everyone sees, confident, polished, in control. And then there's the version who wakes up at 3 a.m., wondering if she should have chosen a different hospital. Jake looked at her steadily. You're not alone in that. They sat in quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. Something passed between them, a mutual understanding that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with survival. They were both carrying losses the world expected them to have already moved past, but pain had no expiration date. Lily stirred again. This time her eyes blinked open, cloudy with sleep. Jake smiled down at her. Hey, Munchkin. You're okay. Lily looked around, confused by the unfamiliar space, then turned her gaze toward Evelyn. Evelyn hesitated, unsure if she should smile or speak or look away. Lily solved it for her by reaching out small fingers, brushing Evelyn's coat sleeve. Mama, she whispered, confused. Jake's heart dropped. No, baby, that's not. But Evelyn raised a hand, stopping him gently. It's okay, she said, her voice trembling. She reached out and took Lily's hand in hers. No, she whispered back. I'm not your mama. But I'm glad you're here. Lily blinked sleepily, seemed content with that, and curled back against her father's chest. Jake didn't know what to say. He only knew that something had cracked open in Evelyn's face, a mixture of joy and ache and something like grace. He cleared his throat. Thank you. For earlier. For all of this. Evelyn shook her head. I didn't do it for you. He raised an eyebrow, amused. That's reassuring. She smiled, a small, real smile. I did it for her. For the little girl I never got to hold. Jake nodded. He understood. More than she knew? A chime rang through the cabin, signaling the final descent. The spell, such as it was, began to fade. Jake looked out the window, city lights glimmering like fireflies below. We're almost there, he murmured to Lily. But part of him, an inconvenient, persistent part, hoped they weren't. Because this moment, this accidental alignment of pain and kindness and humanity felt like something he hadn't had in years, a beginning. And for Evelyn Hart, who had forgotten what it meant to let someone stay past the first conversation, it felt dangerously like a door she didn't know she wanted to open. The plane touched down with a gentle jolt, rubber-meeting runway beneath the quiet thrum of engines winding down. Cabin lights flickered to full brightness. Seat belts clicked. The usual rustle of passengers gathering their belongings filled the space, but in row 2, neither Jake nor Evelyn moved. Lily had fallen back asleep, tucked beneath her father's coat. Her tiny fingers curled around the fabric at his chest, her breath slow and warm. Jake cradled her instinctively, as if letting go even for a second would allow everything around him to unravel. Evelyn sat still, watching the boarding door open, her expression unreadable. Jake glanced over. You don't look eager to leave. She exhaled through her nose, not quite a sigh. I never do. Airports tend to have that effect on people, he offered, trying to keep the tone light. She turned to him slowly. Airplanes, not airports. He raised a brow. Difference being, in the air, she said, there's no weight, no judgment, no history. Jake considered that. You don't strike me as someone who runs from things. Evelyn looked away. I don't run. I just pause where the world feels less cruel. A moment passed before she added quieter, It's the landing I always dread. Jake nodded. Yeah, that's when everything waiting for you comes rushing back. They stood together, still not reaching for bags. Passengers flowed past like a stream around rocks, some offering polite nods or curious glances. Where are you headed? She asked. Jake looked down at Lily. Children's Specialist Hospital, North Side. Evelyn's eyes flickered. Dr. Martin? He blinked. You know him? She nodded. He consulted on my pregnancy. He's brilliant, old school. Heart first, data second. Jake smiled faintly. That's what they told me. Said if we don't get in before Friday, we miss our shot. I pulled every string I had left. She tilted her head, searching his face. And after that, he hesitated. I don't know. Probably head back home. I work nights at a repair shop. I take whatever jobs I can find to stay afloat. It's not glamorous, but it keeps us going. She watched him closely. You gave up a lot, didn't you? Jake met her gaze. I didn't see it that way. Not at first. When my wife died, I thought I was just holding things together until someone came to fix it. But no one came. So I became the glue. Evelyn nodded slowly, something tender flickering in her eyes. That kind of love leaves a mark. He looked at her then, not just at her face, but into her. The layers, the walls, the fragile places she kept behind polished silence. What about you? He asked. Her lips twitched a half-smile. You want the real version or the press release? Always the real. She glanced toward the window as the jet bridge connected. I was 29 when I took over Hart Aviation. My father had built it up brick by brick. He died, suddenly aneurysm. No succession plan. The board didn't believe I was ready, so I made them believe. Jake listened quietly, impressed. Built the fleet, expanded international routes, launched the business class redesign all within 2 years. I got used to rooms full of people waiting for me to fail. Jake asked softly, And did you? She turned back. Only in the ways that don't make headlines. Her voice caught ever so slightly. I married a man who loved the image of me. Not the person. He was there when we lost the baby. But he left soon after. I stayed. I buried her. Then I buried the marriage. Jake's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Evelyn nodded, eyes glassy but steady. I don't talk about her. I thought if I said her name out loud it would undo me. But watching you hold Lily, it made me remember something I wasn't ready to forget. Jake looked down. Lily stirred and he gently rocked her. Sometimes I feel like everything I've built is made of sand, that at any moment it could collapse. Evelyn gave him a look filled with a rare kind of respect. But you still build it. That's what makes you different. There was a pause, a moment of unspoken gravity between them, the kind that only comes when two people recognize the pieces they've both lost and the strength it takes to carry what remains. The aisle cleared. A flight attendant approached with a soft smile. Miss Hart, Mr. Bennett, you're welcome to disembark at your convenience. Evelyn stood slowly. So did Jake, shifting Lily gently without waking her. They stepped into the jet bridge together, the cool air washing over them like the first breath after a long dive. Jake adjusted the strap of his duffel bag. I should call a cab. I have a car waiting, Evelyn said, glancing at her phone. Let me drop you at the hospital. Jake hesitated. That's not necessary. I know, she replied, but I'd like to. For her. She nodded toward Lily, who murmured softly in her sleep. Jake considered her offer his instinct to decline out of pride habit reflex, but something about this moment didn't feel transactional. It felt like grace. All right, he said finally. Thank you. As they walked side by side toward the terminal doors, Jake looked at Evelyn, not as the CEO, not as the stranger in 1A, but as a woman who had sat in the dark with him, shared silence, and chose to speak her pain anyway. He didn't know what came next. He didn't need to, because for the first time in a very long time someone had stepped into his world and stayed without judgment, without pity, without agenda. And maybe, just maybe, the ground beneath him wasn't made of sand after all. Maybe it was beginning to settle into something solid, something real. The sleek, black sedan pulled away from the arrivals curb with the quiet purr of precision engineering. Jake sat in the back seat, Lily asleep in his arms, her soft breath fogging a small patch of his jacket. Evelyn sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward, the picture of composed stillness. The silence between them now was different than on the plane. It was weighted not with grief, but with the strange calm that follows an emotional storm, the quiet in a room after everyone has stopped crying. Thanks again for the ride, Jake said quietly. You really didn't have to. Evelyn glanced sideways, her tone soft but firm. "I know. That's why it mattered." He met her eyes for a brief second, then looked down at Lily. The little girl whimpered in her sleep, clinging tighter to her father's chest. They pulled into the circular drive of the Children's Specialist Hospital, a modest but well-kept building nestled between two high-rise offices, the kind of place where miracles were quiet and hard-earned. The driver stepped out and opened the door for them. Jake shifted, carefully adjusting Lily, her head lolling against his shoulder. Evelyn stepped out first, then reached back instinctively to take his bag. "I've got it," he said, but her hand didn't move. "I'm coming in with you." He hesitated. "You don't have to," Evelyn cut him off gently. "I want to. Let me do this." Jake studied her for a moment. She wasn't doing this to fix him. She wasn't trying to play hero. She simply wanted to be near this child, to offer something good. And maybe Jake realized to rewrite a moment in her own past that never got a second chance. He nodded. Inside the lobby, the receptionist looked up with a practiced smile which flickered slightly when she saw Jake's worn jeans and weathered coat. "Appointment?" she asked. "Yes. Jake Bennett. For Dr. Martin." She tapped at the keyboard. "One moment. Ah, yes. I see your appointment. Insurance was verified last night, but the balance due." "We're covering it," Evelyn said before Jake could speak. The receptionist blinked. "Excuse me." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice crisp. "The Heart Foundation has an account with your hospital. Have the billing department charge all services for Lily Bennett under our pediatric grant." Jake's jaw tensed. "Evelyn." She turned to him, calm but unwavering. "This isn't charity. It's a program, one you qualify for." The receptionist gave a subtle nod, clearly familiar with Evelyn's authority. "Of course. I'll update the records." Jake stared at Evelyn. "You don't even know me." She met his gaze. "I know enough." He looked down, swallowing hard. There was something humbling about being helped when you weren't used to it, when you were the one who always figured things out with scraped knuckles and duct tape. Before he could say anything else, a nurse called out. "Mr. Bennett, we're ready." Jake stood slowly. Lily had stirred her eyelids, fluttering open. Evelyn leaned down, brushing a wisp of hair from the child's face. "Hi, sweetheart." Lily blinked at her, bleary and confused, then reached out and touched Evelyn's fingers. Jake cleared his throat, his voice rough. "We'll be back soon." Evelyn nodded. "I'll wait." He paused, unsure why that mattered, but it did. The examination room was warm, painted in soft greens and blues. A mural of woodland creatures danced across one wall. Lily sat on the table legs swinging, while Dr. Martin, gray-haired, steady with kind eyes and sleeves rolled to the elbows, listened intently to Jake's halting explanation. He asked questions, real ones. Not from a checklist, but from experience. He didn't interrupt when Jake spoke. He asked about Lily's sleep patterns, her early development, her cough, the stubborn fever. He held her hand, gently made her giggle with a finger puppet, and took his time. When it was over, Dr. Martin leaned back with a thoughtful look. "She's smart," he said. "She's also delayed, but not in a way that's irreversible. With the right therapy speech, motor sensory integration, she'll thrive." Jake exhaled, slow and shaky. "You really think so? I know, so the doctor said. But the next 6 months are key." Jake nodded slowly, mentally calculating costs, time, logistics. Dr. Martin seemed to read his mind. "You've got help now. Use it." Jake didn't know how to respond, so he said what felt truest. "Thank you." When Jake stepped back into the lobby, Evelyn was seated in one of the plush chairs, legs crossed, flipping through a medical brochure she clearly wasn't reading. She looked up immediately, eyes searching his. "Well," he let out a breath. "It's not as bad as I feared. But it won't be easy." She smiled faintly. "Nothing worth it ever is." He took a seat beside her. Lily, now more alert, curled into his side and watched Evelyn cautiously. Jake turned toward her. "You really didn't have to wait." "I know," she said again, "but I wanted to see you come back with hope on your face." Jake let that sink in. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't manipulation. It was pure, rare kindness, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. He looked at her, long and slow. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Evelyn considered her answer. "Because I've spent years building things that made me feel powerful, but none of it ever made me feel connected. Not like this, not like now." Jake glanced down at Lily, who was gently reaching out toward Evelyn's charm bracelet again, fascinated. Evelyn extended her hand. Lily's tiny fingers brushed the golden airplane charm. Evelyn smiled. "She loves that thing," Jake said. "She can have it," Evelyn replied almost in a whisper. Jake looked at her sharply. "It means something to you." Evelyn nodded. "And now it means something more." The driver returned, waiting by the door. But Jake didn't stand up yet. Neither did she. The lobby had emptied. Outside, dusk was falling over the city, painting the sidewalk in muted orange light. For a long time they sat in that silence again. But now it was a silence filled with meaning. Not everything had to be said. Some beginnings spoke for themselves. Jake Bennett's apartment was the size of a closet with a view of nothing but the brick wall next door. The single-room layout forced his life into one small rectangle, a twin bed shoved into the corner, a threadbare couch that swallowed him whole, and a corner desk where bills and paperwork teetered in precarious stacks. On the kitchenette counter sat an enamel-drip coffee pot that had seen better days, its spout stained brown, its handle worn smooth. The aroma of stale coffee hung in the air like an unwelcome guest. It was Monday morning, or what passed for morning on the night shift. Jake staggered in at 7:15 a.m., a plate of half-eaten eggs still balanced precariously in his hand. He peeled off his work jacket, his bones protesting after a 12-hour shift at the auto repair shop. When he laid Lily carefully into her playpen, a modest wooden contraption he bought used off Craigslist. Her wide blue eyes blinked sleepily, then flashed with recognition. She reached out for him, and despite his fatigue, Jake felt a rush of warmth. He sighed, poured himself a cup of the bitter brew, and sat at the desk. The unpaid cell phone bill glared at him from the top of the stack, past due. Service suspended. Beneath it, rent notices and several medical invoices poked out from manila envelopes. Northside Children's Specialist Hospital. $2,743.56. Chicago Pediatrics Billing. Past due. He braced himself and opened the hospital envelope first. To his astonishment, the invoice inside wasn't addressed to him. Instead, a single sheet of hospital letterhead bore the following message: Northside Children's Specialist Hospital. ATN Billing Department, Re Lily Bennett, DOB 03-14-2022. Account number 0458-237-912. Effective immediately, all outstanding balances and future treatment costs for the above patient have been charged to Heart Foundation Pediatric Grant ID HF 905237. For questions regarding coverage, contact heartfoundation.org. 1-800-HEART-14. Thank you for choosing Northside Children's Specialist Hospital. Jake's heart thudded in his chest. He reread the letter to make sure there was no fine print, no hidden asterisks. Nothing. The total amount due, which just days ago had felt like a weight meant to break him, had been wiped away completely. He blinked, staring at the Heart Foundation Pediatric Grant in disbelief. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind. How? Why? Who? He rifled through the rest of the paperwork: the outpatient therapy authorization form, the physical therapy estimate, several pages of clinical notes from Dr. Martin. Every medical fee, every projected cost for Lily's intensive speech and motor therapy for the next 6 months all bore the same notation: funded by Heart Foundation Pediatric Grant. "Kiss me, I'm dreaming," he muttered under his breath, though he knew no one was there to witness it except the peeling paint on the wall. Then he remembered Siet 1A. He dipped his head, trying to still the rapid pulse pounding in his neck. Memories of Evelyn's calm voice played in his mind. It's not charity. It's a program. One you qualify for. He paced the small space once forward, then back, every step echoing within him. With each circuit, doubt and gratitude warred inside him like two opposing currents. His pride bristled. He wasn't used to being helped, especially not by a stranger. But Lily's future was at stake. Would any pride matter if he secured a path forward for his daughter? He sank into the threadbare couch and rested his forehead in his hands. He remembered late-night drives to the pharmacy scraping together change for cough syrup. He'd pawned his father's old watch the week before to pay for a doctor's visit. He'd taken on an extra weekend shift, sacrificing the little time he had left for Lily. All to avoid what he now realized was inevitable. Tears gathered unbidden at the corners of his eyes. Not tears of weakness, he told himself, but of relief and something more hope. Hope. It was a fragile thing, like a crystal dropped in a dark room. He tiptoed within himself, afraid it might shatter if he grasped it too tightly. He heard a giggle. Lily had woken and was playing with her plush bunny, tugging at its ears with tiny fingers. Jake wiped his eyes, climbed to his feet, and gathered her into his arms. She nuzzled his shoulder, blinking up at him. He felt the weight of her trust settle over him, a mantle of love that made his heart both swell and ache. "Daddy's got good news," he whispered, stroking her hair. She blinked sleepily, her pudgy cheeks turning a faint rose. She reached for his chin with her chubby hand, and he kissed her palm, letting the warmth of her skin reassure him that life still held gentle moments even in their cramped, worn-out apartment. He set her down gently and walked to the kitchenette. Grabbing a fresh coffee mug, he splashed cold water on his face. He stared at his reflection in the stainless steel fridge door, dark circles under red-rimmed eyes, stubble shading his jaw, a shirt stained with grease from the shop. He looked every bit the tired single dad hanging on by a thread. But he also saw something else, someone who had been given a chance to heal an echo of a promise that his daughter would not go without because of his losses. He gathered Lily's mug and spoon her breakfast and carried them back to the couch. She squealed when she saw the pink slice of banana floating in her oatmeal. Jake smiled at her thoughts churning. He thought about Evelyn Hart. He remembered the softness of her eyes when Lily had whispered Mama an accident that had broken his heart and hers in the same moment. He remembered the way she'd watched them at the hospital as if she were bracing herself against a future she had lost. He remembered the gentle way she touched the charm bracelet around her wrist, a tiny golden airplane that had snagged Lily's attention more than once. He looked down at Lily now, her grin bright enough to light the dingy room. And he knew he would never forget. He could not let himself forget. He nudged Lily's spoon closer, then sat cross-legged on the floor to feed her by hand. With each bite, he repeated the same mantra. "You're going to be okay, kiddo. We're going to be okay." When Lily finished, she stretched, standing in his lap as if ready to explore the world. Jake grabbed his phone, a battered flip model kept alive by a prepaid plan, and stared at it. He had no credit. His last few dollars had been spent on formula. The letter from the hospital had arrived unexpectedly, but there was no money left for airtime. He flipped open the phone and saw 3 missed calls from an unknown number along with a voicemail notification. He swallowed. Could it be? He dialed the voicemail. "Mr. Bennett, this is Karen from Heart Foundation." The voice was calm, professional. "I'm just following up regarding our sponsorship of Lily Bennett's medical care. If you have any questions or need further assistance, please feel free to call me at 1-800-HEART-14. Good luck, and we wish Lily a swift recovery." The recording ended. No personal message from Evelyn. Just a standard line from a foundation employee. And yet hearing her name, Heart Foundation, echoed like a benediction. He closed his eyes, leaned his head back, and let out a long, shuddering exhale. He'd been running on adrenaline and anxiety for weeks. Now, for the first time, the tight knot in his chest loosened. He tucked the phone into his pocket, rose, and cradled Lily against his chest, her head tucked beneath his chin. "Let's go for a walk, Princess," he whispered. She cooed in her sleep. He carried her to the door, slipping into his worn boots and jacket, and locked up behind them. The apartment felt smaller now, but in a good way, as if the walls themselves were applauding the shift in their fortunes. Outside, the air was crisp, the early morning sun casting long shadows down the street. It was a quiet neighborhood of row houses, each with a small stoop and a patch of grass or a potted plant. He walked slowly with Lily secure in his arms, the significance of the gesture echoing tenderly within him. They passed neighbors watering flowers, a newspaper left on a stoop, a dog walker and its leashed retriever greeting them with a wagging tail. As he headed back home, he noticed a small park a few blocks away, a grassy expanse with a worn slide and swings that squeaked whenever someone moved. It struck him that for the first time in a long while he could breathe. The impending hospital bills, the looming financial crisis, they were gone. In their place was something new. Something fragile, the chance for normalcy, for stability, for hope. And he swore to himself that he would honor this gift. He'd work the long hours, yes, but he'd also make time for Lily's therapy sessions, driving her to and from every appointment. He'd find a way to mend the fractured parts of their life brick by careful brick. Reaching his apartment door, he paused, still feeling the sunlight on his face. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, as if exhaling fear and inhaling possibility. He glanced down at Lily, her eyelids fluttering open, and he smiled. Ready for breakfast, number 2, he asked, his voice soft, but filled with conviction. Her bright blue eyes flicked open and she cooed, "Dada." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, baby. Dada's right here." He carried her back inside, feeling sturdier than he had in months. The envelope from the hospital lay on the table edges, frayed from being handled. He picked it up, looked at the Heart Foundation logo one more time and brushed his thumb over the embossed letters. A new chapter had begun, not just for Lily's health, but for both of them. And as Jake set the letter down and began prepping oatmeal for the second time that morning, he whispered into the small apartment, "We're going to be okay." For the first time, it sounded like a promise. Jake didn't normally keep newspapers in the house. Everything he needed to know came from radio news or whatever headline was posted at the gas station while he fueled up. But this paper had been handed to him by Marcus, the owner of the garage, with a smirk and a slap on the back. "You've got fans now," Bennett Marcus had said, thrusting the folded front page into his grease-streaked hands. "Maybe you'll start charging more for oil changes." Jake had grinned awkwardly, thinking it was a joke, but when he unfolded the paper at lunch and wiped his hands on a rag, his breath caught in his chest. Chicago's youngest aviation tycoon returns to public eye. Evelyn Hart steps into spotlight with record-breaking pediatric grant. There she was, Evelyn. Not the woman in a soft blouse sitting beside him in seat 1A, not the quiet soul who touched Lily's hand with reverence, not the grieving mother who spoke of her daughter with a whisper, but Evelyn Hart in her armor. Press ready. Perfectly tailored suit, chin lifted, just enough eyes distant but polished. Beside her, the caption listed awards, titles, business achievements. A full-page profile told the rest of the story. Hart Aviation's recent philanthropic move, a new initiative in pediatric health, grants the first recipient already in treatment. Jake swallowed hard. He reread the paragraph twice. The Heart Foundation's new grant program launched this week with a quiet but impactful gesture, full sponsorship of long-term treatment for a 2-year-old girl named Lily Bennett, whose father Jake could not be reached for comment. He stared at the photo again. The face he remembered, yes, but with a whole different frame. This wasn't Evelyn on a plane lost in memory and grief. This was Evelyn, the public figure. The unreachable woman at the top of a skyscraper. His gut twisted not from betrayal, no, not that, but from something more fragile. Distance. She had given him and Lily a miracle, yes, but she had done it from her world, her stage, her castle in the sky. And he was just the man holding the wrench. He folded the newspaper and set it down on the break room table. His coworkers were joking around, passing fries, cursing at the radio, but the voices faded into background noise. He kept hearing one sentence over and over, could not be reached for comment. She hadn't asked, hadn't told him, hadn't said a word, and yet she had seen them, heard them, cared enough to move. Jake looked down at his hands. Grease still lined the edges of his nails. These hands, fixed engines, unplugged drains, held a child close in the middle of the night. But they didn't belong to the kind of man who appeared in headlines next to women like Evelyn Hart. After his shift ended, he drove home with the windows cracked open, the wind in his hair, and Lily babbling in the car seat behind him. She had just started stringing sounds together, a musical lilt of vowels and giggles, and Jake couldn't stop glancing back at her in the mirror, a grin tugging at his mouth despite everything. That evening, once Lily was asleep and the dishes were stacked drying on a towel, Jake unfolded the newspaper again. This time, he wasn't looking at the headline. He was looking at her eyes. There was something there buried behind the confidence behind the CEO pose, a flicker of sorrow, and also resolve. He turned the page and found a quote from the interview. "I believe in helping people quietly. The loudest changes don't always come from microphones. Sometimes they come from one seat on one flight." Jake leaned back slowly. One seat, one flight. She hadn't forgotten. She wasn't using Lily for press. She had protected Jake's name. And hers too. The grant was public, but the people inside the story had been left untouched. Anonymous. Safe. He closed the paper and stared at the ceiling. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe distance wasn't about status. Maybe it was about fear. About not knowing whether to cross the invisible line between gratitude and connection. Between a gesture and something more. Maybe she'd drawn that line so carefully out of respect, not rejection. He looked over at Lily's sleeping form, tucked into her crib beneath a knitted blanket from a neighbor. Her tiny chest rose and fell with the rhythm of safety. He owed Evelyn something, not just thanks, but honesty. He opened his laptop, which took 3 tries to boot. The Wi-Fi was slow, but eventually he found it the Hart Foundation's official site. On the Contact Us page was a form impersonal and sleek, but at the bottom in small print was a line. Inquiries regarding private sponsorships may be directed to Ms. Evelyn Hart's assistant, elaine.bishop.hartfoundation.org. Jake stared at the address. His hands hovered above the keyboard. Then, slowly, he began to type. Subject: Thank you and something more dear. Ms. Hart, I saw the paper today. Not going to lie, it threw me. Not because I'm ungrateful. Far from it. You gave my daughter a future. That's not the kind of thing you can put into words or repay. But what struck me most wasn't the grant or the article. It was that you never said my name. You didn't turn our story into your spotlight. You let us keep it. You let me keep it. Thank you for that. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if you want to hear from me again. But if you do, if you ever want to know what your kindness built, we'll be at the playground off Belmont and Sycamore every Saturday around 10 a.m. Bring coffee if you come. Jake. He hit send before he could overthink it. Then he closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was bathed in soft streetlight. Calm. Ordinary. And yet everything had changed. The girl in the paper was no longer just a stranger with a grieving heart. She was someone who had given his life a second wind. And Jake. He was beginning to realize he wanted to know her beyond the headlines. The first snowfall of the season drifted down like a whispered invitation as Evelyn Hart stood at her office window high above the city. Chicago was already blurring into winter steel-gray buildings softened by powdery white taxis, leaving melted trails in the streets below. She cradled a mug of untouched tea between her palms, her mind far from board meetings and quarterly reports. Elaine, her assistant, had knocked gently 15 minutes earlier. Ms. Hart, we received a message from a Jake Bennett. The name had made Evelyn turn so quickly her tea nearly spilled. Elaine had handed her a printed email, cheeks flushed with curiosity she dared not voice. Evelyn waited until the door closed again, then read the message 3 times. Bring coffee if you come. It was such a simple invitation. And yet it undid her. She hadn't reached out after the grant. She told herself it was enough that her gesture, her silence, was respectful. Clean. Let him take the help and keep his pride. But now, reading his words, Evelyn understood something deeper. Jake hadn't been looking for charity. He'd been looking for connection. And so had she. Now, as snow tapped lightly against the glass, she made a decision. She turned from the window, picked up her coat, and left the office without a word. The playground was quiet for a Saturday, save for the crunch of boots in fresh snow and the delighted squeals of children chasing each other. A cluster of parents huddled near the benches, cups of coffee steaming in gloved hands. Evelyn spotted them immediately, Jake in his navy peacoat, Lily bundled in a puffy pink snowsuit, cheeks red with cold and glee. She was pushing a toy truck down a slope of snow, her laughter rising in little bursts that made Evelyn's throat tighten. Jake hadn't seen her yet. She hesitated for a moment behind the black iron fence, her heart suddenly racing. This was different from the plane, different from the hospital. She wasn't arriving with power or solutions. She was arriving with her heart in her hands. But Lily spotted her first. The little girl looked up mid-laugh, her eyes wide, then pointed excitedly. "Ev-E!" Jake turned, startled. His face registered surprise and something softer, something almost like hope. Evelyn smiled and lifted the cup in her hand. "You said to bring coffee." Jake's smile broke slowly like dawn after a long night. "You showed up," he said, rising from the bench. "You asked me to," she replied, "and I don't get invited many places without cameras." He took the cup from her, their fingers brushing just briefly. Lily ran toward Evelyn, arms wide, and Evelyn knelt down, letting herself be caught in the toddler's clumsy embrace. "You remember me?" Evelyn asked, brushing snow off Lily's hat. Lily nodded and pointed to the charm bracelet peeking from under Evelyn's coat sleeve. Airpain Jake chuckled. "She's been obsessed with that little gold plane ever since the flight." "I kept it on," Evelyn said, looking down. Felt wrong to take it off after she touched it. They sat on the bench, Evelyn holding the extra cup Jake had brought, watching Lily play in the snow, chasing her truck downhill and tumbling into laughter when she fell. "She's thriving," Evelyn said, marveling. Jake nodded. 3 weeks into therapy and she's already trying more words. She said banana yesterday. Or something close to it. Na-na-na. But hey, we'll count it. Evelyn smiled. "I wish you'd told me." "I didn't know if you wanted to hear from me," Jake admitted. "You seemed untouchable." She exhaled, watching her breath fog in the air. "That's the armor. You wear it long enough, people forget there's someone underneath." Jake looked at her. Really looked. The cold painted her cheeks a soft rose, but her eyes were the same, clear, intelligent, and just a little guarded. "I didn't forget," he said. Evelyn turned to him, caught off guard by the weight of his words. "I meant what I wrote," Jake added. "You didn't make it about you. You didn't even ask for thanks. But I wanted you to see what your kindness built, that it's real." Evelyn swallowed the emotion rising in her throat. "I didn't know if I had the right." Jake tilted his head. "The right?" She hesitated. "To be in someone else's story again. To walk into a life I didn't earn." Jake leaned forward. "Evelyn, that seat on the plane. You didn't earn it either. You chose it, just like you chose to move us up, just like you're choosing to be here now." She looked down at her gloved hands, then at Lily, who had begun building a snow fort with plastic spoons and infinite determination. "I never wanted to be seen as broken," she admitted. "But some days I still am." Jake nodded. "We all are, but broken doesn't mean unwanted." Their eyes met again, and the hush between them was full of meaning. "I don't know what this is," Evelyn said, voice barely above a whisper, "but I don't want it to end." Jake looked back toward Lily, who was now trying to balance the toy truck on top of a snowball. "It doesn't have to," he said. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't ache anymore, the kind that felt safe, whole. Lily ran back to them breathless and red-faced. She climbed into Jake's lap, then reached for Evelyn's glove and held it like a secret. "Stay," she said with the sincerity only a child could muster. Evelyn smiled, her heart aching and expanding all at once. "I'd like that," she whispered, and for the first time in years she meant it. Evelyn didn't remember the last time she had laughed without rehearsing it. But that morning, under a pale blue sky, watching Lily pile snow into the sleeve of Jake's coat while he sputtered in mock protest laughter, came from a place unpracticed and real. They'd spent nearly 2 hours in the playground. Evelyn had brought muffins from a cafe near her building. Jake had brought his weathered thermos of homemade coffee. Together they shared stories between bites and sips, their words drifting between them like threads slowly weaving something unseen but unmistakable. Jake was quiet in a way that didn't seek to fill space with noise. He listened, really listened, and when he laughed it started in his chest and warmed the whole bench. Evelyn, for her part, let herself lean a little closer. Not physically, at least, not yet, but emotionally. Each moment with them, the way Jake spoke gently to Lily, the way Lily looked at Evelyn with pure trust, loosened something she didn't realize had rusted shut. By noon, Lily had fallen asleep in her stroller cheeks, flushed from cold and joy. Evelyn walked beside Jake down the slushy sidewalk, her gloved hands tucked into her coat heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "You two have a rhythm," she said softly. Jake looked down at Lily. It took time. The first few months after Beth, my wife, passed, I felt like I was raising someone else's child. Not because I didn't love her, but because I was scared I'd ruin her. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. "I learned by messing up," Jake added. "Sleep schedules, feeding diapers, insurance forms, I failed at all of it. But Lily never gave up on me." Evelyn smiled faintly. Children forgive faster than adults. Jake glanced sideways. "Do you?" She didn't answer right away. "Then I'm learning." They stopped outside Jake's apartment building, a red brick walk-up with iron steps and a crooked mailbox. Jake reached into the stroller to check on Lily, who stirred and mumbled something that sounded suspiciously like muffin. "She's going to be up in 10 minutes asking for more food," he said with a chuckle. "I'll take that as a warning," Evelyn replied. Jake looked up, studying her for a moment. "Would you like to come up?" It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't a date. It was a moment, an invitation not into his home, but into his life. Evelyn hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because it scared her how much she did. "I can't," she said gently. "Not today." Jake nodded, no offense taken. "But I have something for you," she added. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a boarding pass. Jake frowned, puzzled. "What's this A flight?" she said. "Seattle. 3 days from now. Just a weekend. I booked 3 seats, 2 for you and Lily, and 1 for someone who wants to spend a little more time without the world watching." Jake blinked. "You want me to come with you?" "I want you to know what it's like to fly without pressure," she said. "No headlines, no foundation grants, just the sky, and someone who used to be afraid to land." He turned the envelope over in his hands, then looked up at her, searching her face. "I don't know if I belong in your world," he said quietly. She smiled. "I'm not asking you to enter my world. I'm asking you to let me into yours." Jake swallowed. "And Lily, I booked a family suite," she said, smiling. "There's a kids' museum 5 blocks from the hotel. I figured she'd want to touch everything." He laughed. "That's a safe bet." They stood there for a moment, 2 people in the middle of a sidewalk surrounded by wind and old bricks and the scent of salt from the icy street, and everything felt steady. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I ask." She reached out, touched his hand, briefly gloved against gloved, nothing skin deep, but still electric. Then she turned and walked away, not looking back. Jake watched her until she disappeared around the corner. When he stepped inside his apartment, Lily blinked open her eyes and said, "Where's Evie?" Jake smiled. She went flying. Lily sat up in her stroller, confused. Fly Jake crouched down beside her and kissed her forehead. Maybe he whispered, "We will too." He placed the envelope on the table. And, for the first time since Beth had died, he found himself making room not just in his apartment, but in his heart. For something new. For something that had begun at 30,000 feet. And was now asking to land. The sun was just beginning to rise over Seattle when Jake stepped off the jet bridge Lily tucked into his arms, blinking sleepily. She'd slept most of the flight, her cheek pressed against his chest, one tiny hand clutching his sweatshirt like it was the anchor to her whole world. Her small breaths had matched the rhythm of the engine, steady, soothing, safe. He paused in the terminal, taking in the scent of roasted coffee, the hum of early travelers, the sight of the distant mountains emerging through the windows like something carved from a dream. It wasn't Chicago, it wasn't home, but it didn't feel foreign either. And she was there. Evelyn stood just past the glass divider, simple in jeans boots and a navy wool coat that brought out the color in her eyes. She wasn't flanked by assistants or tucked behind tinted SUV windows. She stood alone, watching him, her hands loosely folded in front of her, and when she saw him, her smile bloomed. Not the one from glossy magazine covers, but the rare, quiet kind reserved for someone who mattered. Jake's breath caught just slightly. He hadn't realized how much he missed that smile. Lily stirred and whispered, "Evie." Evelyn walked forward, holding out her hands. "You made it." Jake nodded, eyes still fixed on her. "We did." She took Lily from his arms like she'd done it 100 times. Lily reached for her charm bracelet again, still enamored with the tiny airplane charm. Evelyn laughed soft and real. Jake adjusted the strap on his duffel bag. "Didn't want to assume you'd still be waiting." Evelyn looked up at him. "Jake." "I'd wait as long as it took." For a moment, neither of them moved. There was too much in the air unsaid, but felt like music you can't hear but somehow know by heart. They walked through the terminal together, Lily in Evelyn's arms, chattering about clouds and snacks and the loud whoosh when the plane goed up. Jake listened, interjecting with a grin now and then, and Evelyn matched his rhythm without trying. It wasn't orchestrated. It was organic. Outside the car Evelyn had arranged was waiting. Not a limo, not a luxury SUV, just a modest family rental with a booster seat already installed in the back. Jake chuckled. "You really thought of everything." "I had help," she said, smiling. "I asked a friend who's a single dad." He looked at her sideways. "Sounds like a smart guy." She turned to him and said without hesitation, "He is." The suite overlooked Puget Sound, its window walls casting soft morning light across a living area filled with cozy blankets, a low table set with coloring books, and a small vase of daisies. Lily was soon immersed in crayons and stickers sprawled out on the carpet. Jake and Evelyn stood nearby, coffee cups in hand, the early quiet between them thick with something fragile and beautiful. He spoke first. "You know, I thought I'd come here to say thank you. For the grant, for the hospital, for that seat on the plane." Evelyn looked at him gently. And now Jake sipped his coffee. "Now, I think I came here because I didn't want it to end." She nodded slowly. "Neither did I." There was a beat, a breath. Then Jake stepped forward just close enough to brush her hand with his. "I'm not a rich man, Evelyn," he said. "I don't have a clean past or a picture-perfect life. But I'm here. And if you ever need someone to fly with you, even when it's bumpy, I'm your guy." Evelyn's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She only reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers light steady. "And if you ever need to land," she whispered, "I'll be there waiting." They kissed, not a grand cinematic kiss, but one filled with quiet assurance. The kind of kiss that said, "You're safe now." From the floor, Lily looked up and giggled. "You kissed." Jake pulled away and laughed, brushing his hand through her hair. Guilty. Evelyn crouched beside Lily and pulled something from her bag. A small velvet box. Inside was the golden airplane charm. But now it hung from a new bracelet, this one strung with 3 initials, A.U. B, J, B, E, H. Lily gasped. "That mine?" Evelyn smiled. "Only if you promise to keep flying." Jake knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both. "I think we all are," he said. That night, after Lily had gone to sleep, curled in the middle of the king-sized bed surrounded by storybooks and hotel pillows, Jake and Evelyn sat by the window. Seattle sparkled beneath them, lights on the water, distant ferries gliding like stars across the bay. Snow hadn't reached this coast yet, but the air felt clean alive. "I used to think love had to look a certain way," Evelyn said quietly. "Glossy. Grand. Photogenic." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, I thought it looked like a house with a white picket fence and a minivan." She turned to him, eyes thoughtful. "Turns out it can look like a seat-in coach. A tired dad. A brave little girl with a sticker on her forehead." He smiled. "Turns out it looks a lot like this." Evelyn reached for his hand and he took it without hesitation. The charm bracelet caught the light reflecting against the glass, dancing like the stars outside. They didn't need to say more, because some endings weren't endings at all. Some were just a beginning, in seat 2B with heart 1A, and everything they hadn't dared to hope for, finally taking flight. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories every week. Thank you so much for watching. Your presence means the world to us.